Be familiar with this. Laurel Ridge Workforce Solutions is dedicated to empowering businesses, organizations, and individuals through customized training, professional development, and talent solutions. Our corporate training division partners directly with employers across industries to design programs that enhance skills, boost performance, and support long term organizational goals. Today's session is part of our ongoing effort to provide accessible, high impact learning opportunities that connect education to real world business needs. Whether you're joining us from a small business, a large corporation, or a public agency, we guarantee you will find some practical insights and tools that you can start applying right away. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Tiffany Utz. Tiffany is a former and retired elementary principal and teacher. With over 35 years in the field of public education, she has experienced firsthand the power of positivity and the impact it has on the culture of various work environments. Tiffany is an ongoing adjunct instructor with Laurel Ridge Workforce Solutions. In addition, she serves as an educational consultant nationwide. She is passionate in creating inclusive, supportive, and uplifting work atmospheres where teams thrive. If you haven't had a chance to hear Tiffany speak yet, you are in for a pleasant treat. She is one of the best I've heard. So we're excited to have her, and we're going to dive right in. Before we do, just two quick notes. This session will be recorded, and the recording will be shared with all registered participants. And feel free to connect with us afterwards if you'd like to learn more about how Laurel Ridge Workforce Solutions can support your organization's training goals. With that being said, Tiffany, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Great. Thank you, Jay. Good afternoon. Yes, it is afternoon, isn't it? To everyone, thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm really excited about the topic that we're going to talk about and some of the things that I'm going to share with you. Um, I am a very, let's say, hands-on kind of person, so I try to make this as interactive as I can. I recognize that some people feel very comfortable with just putting things in chat, and others like to come off mute and share. Whatever you feel most comfortable with is what I feel like you should go with. I want it to be more of a discussion, more of a conversation when we take a look at what positivity in the workforce looks like and when we look at that as leadership. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, which is going to take you to my presentation. There we go. All right. So, just as Jay said, just to tell you a little bit about my background, my entire background is in public education. All right. I spent over 35 years in the public sector in education, mainly in the elementary grades. I did do some middle and high school with intervention work. Um, but the last few years of my career, I say last few, it's more than few. The last several years of my career was in specific leadership as a building administrator, as an elementary school principal. So I know that what we have representative of here is a variety of different places in the workforce. We're all leaders. We all look at those leadership opportunities. Even when I was a teacher, I was a leader in the classroom as a teacher leader. What I like to say is any kind of any kind of leadership role that we have is relatively universal. The things I'm going to share with you can be imparted and implanted in any kind of workforce. So while some of the situations I'm going to share with you may be a little bit different, being that I was an educator, they are still very um, relative to what you are doing each and every day. All right. And when I talk about the power of positive leadership, please know I'm not talking about the polypositive piece. I'm not talking about the kind that is fake, that is forced. We're talking about what we can build within our mindset, build within ourselves to create positivity in the workplace. So we can see that as we talk about the positive leadership realm, let me get this right. There we go of what I'm going to share with you, a lot of what has shaped my philosophy and my role in this field is some of the work done by John Gordon. Much of what I'm sharing with you today may come from this book, not everything, but I've imposed different elements of different readings that I've done that has really guided me as a school leader and as a leader in the workforce. This is a book here by John Gordon called The Power of Positive Leadership. some specific components he's put out there. I've added to some of those. I have adjusted some of those for this situation in this seminar, just so that we can talk specifically about how it might work for you. So our objectives and our talking points this afternoon, I have 6 specific areas we're going to look at. The first one is, why does positive leadership matter? Why is it even something we're talking about, right? What purpose does it have in our lives and in the lives of our workers? Whoops. How do we drive positive cultures? I am a true proponent that culture is everything. The culture in the workforce. How do we drive that to be positive? How do we take the negativity out of the workplace? How do we create that positive vision? What does that positive vision look like? Another piece is leading with optimism. I'm the very first one to say that in today's world, sometimes being optimistic is somewhat of a challenge. How do we do that on a daily basis, even when the weight of the world or the weight of situations may be pulling us down? A fifth area I think is extremely important, which is building relationships and building our teams. How do we do that with grace? How do we do that with purpose? Which brings us to our very last topic where we're going to talk about, which is leading with purpose. Isn't that why we do this? This is our why. We're going to bring it all back around towards our end of our time together this morning to talk about our why, and what that means in the workplace. So let's just first, by throwing it out there, why does positive leadership even matter? Would anyone like to share why? I mean, you're here for a reason. You've chosen this seminar for a specific reason. Why do you think positive leadership matters in the workplace? Would anyone like to share what they're thinking?
Hi, my name is Michael Mahoney. I'm with Fauquier County Social Services. I think ultimately positive leadership, it comes down to, right, how it comes down to how the message is being communicated to your staff,
Absolutely.
right? I think sometimes there might be changes going on or new processes being implemented that might not be ideal. And based on how you message that to your staff is based on how they're going to receive it, right?
Amen to that. Absolutely,
Something
Michael.
Yeah, I think something that, might not be ideal if you message it correctly, it can kind of lessen the blow as opposed to, if something's not great and you communicate that it's not great, well, then that's gonna set their attitude for how to receive it.
Right. Yeah, so our communication and the way in which we communicate things is a key aspect of this. And we're going to talk a little bit more about communication throughout this as well. Thank you for sharing. Would anyone else like to share? Okay. Well, I want to bring
I
about,
shared in the chat.
oh, shared in the chat. Okay, hold on one second. I don't have the chat. I think either Jay or Diana was looking at the chat.
Hi, Tiffany. If you click on the chat button at the end, at the bottom ribbon, it should pop up on the right-hand side for you to
I
see.
see it now. I had my
Yeah.
different, I'm on 2 screens, so bear with me. I've got one screen in front and one not. I see it. I see this now. Thank you. Positive, it matters by modeling behaviors to like your job. If you're not positive, then that trickles down and can affect the way staff work and feel about the work that they do. Absolutely. That whole trickle down effect is something we're going to be talking about as well. And that you set the tone of what that looks like, right? So, one of the first scenarios I like to share with you when it has to do with positive leadership, and I'm sure some of you may have heard of this. There's a specific fable. It's a very quick book out there written by Damon West. It's actually co-authored by John Gordon, but they talk about 3 different elements, all right, of why that positive leadership matters. And it's a great metaphor into this entire piece. So, let's first talk about the carrot. All right. We know that in life we have adversity that hits us. No one is immune to that. So if we think of adversity and we think of trying times, let's think of that as being our boiling water, right? If we have a carrot, what happens to a carrot when we place it in that boiling hot water? That adversity. Just someone shout it out. What happens to it?
It softens.
Softens, it becomes soft, right? And think about that as your leadership. If you're up against adversity, Do you have the kind of nature where you sort of soften and you cave in and you listen to the outside pieces that come into that, right? Well, there's another piece, and that is the egg. Looks a little bit different. If we think about the egg, what happens to the egg when it's put in a pot of hot boiling water? Anyone? It hardens.
It
Right.
hardens.
It hardens. It gets hard. It becomes a hard-boiled egg. By the way, you did hear I was a teacher, right? So I do ask a lot of questions. So I apologize for that up front. um, but yes, that's exactly what happens. It hardens. So I'm sure we can all think of leaders in our lives that we've either worked under or worked with, where when they were faced with adversity, did they soften? Did they crumble? What was their reaction? How did they lead us through that? I can also think of leaders in my life where if they were under adversity, they hardened. It was hard-nosed. It was very legalistic and very black and white, right? But then I don't know how many other coffee lovers I have out there. What happens to a coffee bean when it is put in hot boiling water? It creates a flavor, it creates an aroma, it creates a beautiful thing. At least in my opinion, coffee is a beautiful thing. So when you think of yourself, very often I'll ask, are you a carrot? Are you an egg? Or are you a coffee bean? I share this with you because I actually did this in one of my buildings. I was asked at one point to go to a building that had a very toxic environment. And in that toxic environment, I was tasked with obviously really trying to change the culture. And one of the things that I did in that culture is I brought on this specific book called The Coffee Bean. It's a very quick 20-minute read. It's very quick. It's a fable, very easy read. I had my entire staff read this book and we talked about this. And we talked about whether we want to be that carrot or the egg or the coffee bean. And I gave that whole piece to them where it's actually sitting right here on my desk. For the year, I created these little pods that had coffee beans in them. And on the top, it says, always be a coffee bean, as a reminder that when we handle and deal with things on an everyday basis, whether they're pleasant, not pleasant, whether they are filled with adversity, we want to communicate, we want to display attitudes and a heart that is more like a coffee bean. We don't want to be hard and hard-nosed. We don't want to be soft and crumble. We want to share the beauty of what that coffee bean can be. So right here on this screen, you see that becoming a positive leader, it's an inside-out process. It begins with us. We have to lead ourselves before we lead others. We have to know what we stand for before we recognize what it is that we want from each other. But by becoming a positive leader, we can impact our team. You have the greatest impact in your organization as a leader. They look up to you. And then positive leadership truly is being about the best version of ourselves and not just keeping that in, but also sharing that with others. It's about being the best version of who we are. So as we look further, let's talk about how do we drive positive cultures? It's not always an easy thing to do. Right? It's not just one thing. Culture is everything in any business, whether you're in the banking business, whether you're in a government entity, whether you're in a public school, it doesn't matter. Culture is everything within your environment. And it drives those expectations and beliefs. It's not static, it's dynamic. And you are creating culture not just by what you say or by what you think, but most importantly, by what you do. And you cannot separate the leader from the culture or the culture from the leader. I always like to think of a story. We all have people in our lives. In fact, I've probably made you think about this when we talked about that carrot, the egg, and the coffee bean. Leaders that have been in our lives, you know, who did we have as mentors? All right. Who were the leaders in our lives that taught us what we want to be in our workforce? I always come back to when I think of it, and I think of an individual who truly impacted my leadership style. I come from a family of educators. My mom was a teacher for 42 years. My dad was an elementary principal. And so I knew and I lived that world my whole life. So much so that when I went away to college, I decided I wanted to do anything but be an educator. I had 5 different majors my freshman year because I did not want to be an educator. I wanted to break that mold and be different. And what did I end up coming and circling back around to, right? I ended up being an educator. It's what I lived. I think of how we drive our positive cultures. So from a young child, I saw the way in which my father did that with staff meetings, not staff meetings, I'm sorry, with staff on holiday events in our house, how he brought his staff in, how he held picnics. I was surrounded in watching him firsthand, how he created that culture within his building. So much so that at his death, or before his death, the school that he was a principal in had shut down. They were consolidating a variety of different schools, but it had shut down, closed down, and they even tore the building down. So obviously, the people that work with us and that we work for, turnover changes over and over again, right? That's going to happen, and bringing new people on board, saying goodbye to others. This entire staff was dismantled and put into different school buildings throughout their district and their county. The time of his death, one of the most impactful things to me was when I walked into that funeral home, and up there was a whole display of flowers, one big swab of flowers. And across the line of it, it said, "Your Johnson Heights family." Johnson Heights was the name of his school. That staff had not been together in 10 years. Now, they still got together monthly, but they were still that family attitude. That was the culture he established. That became his legacy. And so I think when we look at that, we think about what kind of leader do we want to be, right? What kind of leader do we want to establish within the staff that works for us? So think for just a few minutes about what you can do to create and impart that kind of a culture. I am a firm believer that in any kind of work we do, regardless of where you are, reflection is the one piece that always seems to get put on that back burner. We never seem to take the time to truly reflect on our work. And it's such an important element of what we do each and every day. And so we have to, I'm the kind of person I always put it into my calendar, right? I'll be honest with you, I even had that time for reflection. I was very grateful. As a school leader, I had about a 40-minute commute. Now, people will say to me, "You had a 40-minute commute and you felt grateful for that?" I did, because that was my reflection time. Going into work, coming home, that is where I really took the time to think, what could I have done differently today? What happened really well? What can I change upon that? So what you're going to see at the end of each section this afternoon is I have a time of reflection. These are not questions I'm asking you to answer aloud, unless you feel so compelled to do so. These are questions I just want you to think about when you think about your leadership style. So the very first one in this section is, who are you when you're at your best? Think about 3 words that truly describe who you are when you are at the top and at your best. Okay? What are you doing when you're at your best? What does that look like? And then most importantly, what do you want to be known for? What contribution do you want to make to your culture? And what does that look like? Because at the end of the day, it's the impacts that we make with people along the way that matter the most. All right. So to wrap this section up, I think this is a beautiful illustration. John Gordon gave this illustration in one of his books. Culture is important, but a lot of leaders actually don't focus on it because it's not quantifiable. All right. And so a lot of leaders will miss that piece. You can't quantify what culture looks like. It's more of a feel good. It's more of a feeling kind of motion. And a lot of time, let's be honest, the world measures leaders by the results and outcomes, meaning that they focus on the fruit of the tree. But if you look at this statement right here, to create your culture, everyone on the team and the organization must know what the team and the organization stand for. If we think of a tree, those roots are the foundation, right? You cannot have the fruit of that tree without the roots. That root is the culture. That's the people and the process. The fruit is the outcomes. And if we don't take care of the roots, that tree's going to die, and the fruit's not going to be there. I truly and honestly believe that with every ounce of my being. I would always like to say that if I didn't take care of the people in my building, then results, student outcomes didn't happen. I always like to joke with them, if my staff wasn't happy, my students weren't happy. And if my students weren't happy, my parents weren't happy. You have to take care of your people that are in that whole process. So that brings us to the second piece that we're going to take a look at, which is creating a positive vision. How do we do that? What does that look like? You may know what your vision right now looks like, but does your team, do those who work in your organization know what your vision or the vision of that organization looks like? So positive leaders have a vision. They know where they're going. They know where their team is going, and it's very clear. Here you see just a few examples of I'm sure, some brand names that we're all aware of and what their actual vision was. IBM, their vision was solutions for a smarter planet. General Motors, design, build, and sell the world's best vehicles. My favorite right here is Life is Good. I love that brand. To spread the power of optimism. And then Southwest Airlines, who is an airline that is known for its people enrichment, is to become the world's most loved, most flown, and most profitable, airline. So, think about what your vision might be. I think of one of the visions at my schools. I had the pleasure and the honor of leading two different buildings. One building that I led during the time of COVID, we'll get into that a little bit later, but one of those buildings was a building with over 150 staff members, and the other had 95 staff members. So it was a rather large organization. But we had to be really clear about what our vision was. But not only did we have to be clear about what our vision was, we had to make sure we expressed it. So our vision at one of my buildings was, at this school, we put the name of the school there, but at this school, we believe in the power of community, the power of high expectations, and the power of mutual respect. Now, being that I was in a school, we do things as teachers normally do. We put hand motions to it. And so it was, we believe in the power of community, the power of high expectations, and the power of mutual respect. And I guarantee you, every single one of our staff members and our students knew our vision, right? They could recite it. And you know what? Reciting it's great. But what makes the vision a true reality and a possibility is when you know what those words mean, right? And so that is one of the things that I think is really, really important. We have a telescope and we have a microscope. That telescope is our big picture vision. That in our building, it was community. It was high expectations. It was respect for one another. That was our telescope. But our microscope was the daily focus and actions. Those are the little things that drive you each and every day. Every single decision that I or my leadership team or that anyone in our building made had to meet that litmus test of our vision. Does it meet too high expectations? Are we community builders? Does this establish respect for each other and what we're doing? Excuse me. So we know that as a leader, we have to talk about our vision often, but we have to know what it means. We have to be able to apply it to what it means in our organization. Doug Conant was Campbell's Soup CEO, and he believed very, very firmly and minutely in their vision. Their vision, in fact, was to build the world's most extraordinary food company by nourishing people's lives everywhere, every day. He didn't just put it out there and have it on a wall. He didn't just have it on the letterhead of his paper of his papers. He spoke to it each and every day. It didn't matter whether he was in a meeting with 5 people or if he was in a meeting with 500 people. He started with and he talked to that vision each and every day. So much so that it actually pulled them out of the threat of bankruptcy. And the other thing I think we have to be very careful with as leaders is that when things are going really, really well, we don't forget our vision. It's very easy when things are going poor to try to pull it out there to try to help us go further and keep going. But we have to keep it at the forefront, whether things are great, whether it's not great, regardless, right? We want to, leaders actually create clarity. It provides leaders with a roadmap of what we're looking at. So think a minute as we talk about, here we are back to a reflection piece, which I told you I love to share a little bit. As we think about this, What do you see in your team or organization's future? And think about what it looks like. What does your team's future look like? What do you want to build and create together? And how would your team look different if the vision became reality? And not just if the vision became reality, but what does your team look like when it does become reality? And how do you keep it there? How do you sustain that specific piece? So just a few things to think about when we think about what that vision looks like. I remember going into meetings as a classroom teacher and hearing, oh, we have to create our goals and all those things are important. Don't get me wrong. But as a classroom teacher, I was sort of like, just let me go in and teach. But if you don't have a baseline and a formation for what you, and in my situation, what my school stood for, that's our litmus test, right? And everyone has to be aware of that. Any questions at this point or anything anyone wants to share before I continue? Chat real quick. All right. So our third area is positive leaders lead with optimism and positivity. I'm going to come back and I'm going to say it again. I'm not talking about fake positivity. I'm not talking about Pollyanna positive. I'm talking about real, genuine positivity in the workforce. Things that are not forced, right? I always like to say positivity is not something that comes naturally to a lot of people. It doesn't come naturally to me. I don't know if it comes naturally to you. Some people, I think it does. Not everyone. I'm very easily thinking about the negative first. I have to force myself to be optimistic about some things. But what happens in that process is when your mind starts going there, it becomes easier and it becomes a part of who you are. So it's interesting because we all know that adversity and trying times is gonna hit us, especially as leaders. I don't know if you've recognized it or not, but we can't make everyone happy. I am the kind of person, and the reason I almost didn't go into school administration was because I am a people pleaser. I want to make everyone happy, and I know that can't always be the case. All right. So we have to know what our personal style is and what we can do to encourage optimism among others. So there is actually a great story. This is Dr. James Gills. He has a book called The Life Lessons from an Iron Man. This gentleman was 59 years old when he raced in a double, let me get this wrong, double triathlon, double Ironman triathlon. Now, what does that mean? We all know what a triathlon is, right? You're swimming, you're riding a bike, you are running. 24 hours, he does a triathlon. 24 hours after that, he does another one. He did that. He did 6 of them in his lifetime. And the last one he did, he was 59 years old. In an interview, he was asked, how do you do that? And his reaction was that he learned to actually listen to himself. All right. He learned to talk. He was listening to himself, but he wanted to talk to himself versus listen. When he listened to himself, he heard negativity. But when he talked to himself, he increased the positivity in his mindset. And that positivity encouraged him to keep going. So fear, doubt, negativity, that's always going to show up. It's always going to be there, regardless of what organization that we are in. But if we learn to talk to ourselves instead, it can really change it. It can feed ourselves. It can feed encouragement. It can keep us moving forward. And it also comes down to perspective. And what does that specific perspective look like? Well, it's how you see the world determines what the world you see. We know that failures and challenges are a way to grow. Do we see it that way? Do you see it that way? Do we grow? Are they growth opportunities? Anytime we're up against a challenge, when you're in the midst of it, sometimes it's difficult to see it as a growth opportunity. And that's why that reflection piece is so vital and so important. And so we want to make sure that we're seeing that as a growth opportunity in a way that we can grow. What we believe determines how we act, And what our team believes determines what they can accomplish. One of the things that really helped me and my perspective as a leader in the workforce is something I did on a daily basis, and that was a gratitude walk. Do you know it is scientific proof? It is the science. You cannot be grateful and stressed at the same time. There is science behind that. I started every day in my building, or I tried to, with a gratitude walk. And all I did on that gratitude walk was I would walk the hallways and think of all the things that I'm grateful for. Sometimes things, a lot of times things in my work, sometimes in my personal life and at home. And it really established how my day started. I'm not going to deny and lie and say there were not days I probably had to do 5 or 6 gratitude walks to keep my head and my mind space in a good place. All right. And there are some mornings the gratitude walk didn't happen because someone was at my doorstep really wanting to talk or needing to have a meeting. But I always, at some point in that day, needed that gratitude walk. And I knew when it didn't happen because it affected my mindset. William Bratton, another great story. If you haven't learned yet, I love telling stories. But William Bratton was the New York City Police Commissioner back in the 90s. I don't know if you know much about the 1990s in New York City, but the crime rate was at an all-time high. He brought in one-on-one his police chief from each of the 5 boroughs and had individual meetings with them. So 5 different police chiefs. And the one question he asked them was, do you believe crime can be reduced in your area? That was his only question. That's all he asked. Do you believe crime can be reduced in your area? 2 of those police chiefs said yes. 3 of them said no. And then in an interview, someone asked him, well, what did you do? And he said, I had to fire 3 people that day. Because ultimately, why play the game when you can't win it? It all has to do with mindset. If we believe that we can reach the revenue that we are going to reach, that we are going to bring on the people that we can reach, we have a totally different mindset than going into it like we can't. Think about those in the Super Bowl. If those 2 teams went into the Super Bowl thinking, I can't win this, they're not going to. We want people on our team that believes in what we're doing. Belief is greater than thought. And so that also brings me a little bit to what do faith and fear have in common? Those are 2 specific pieces. What do faith and fear have in common? Well, first of all, they both believe in a future that hasn't happened yet. Fear believes in a future that's negative. Faith believes in a future that's positive. So if it hasn't happened yet, why not choose to put your trust in the faith piece of what can be positive, right? And that all has to do with perspective. So in looking at this reflection piece, what do you believe about the future? What does that look like? What do you believe you and your team can accomplish? Are you going in knowing you can accomplish your goals, knowing you can meet the specific pieces of your role? Are you or your team filled with fear or faith? That's a great conversation, by the way, to have with your team. Is it fear that is driving us, or is it faith that is driving us? Because dependent upon that, it is really going to determine your outcome. And then what could you and your team achieve if you shared optimism and belief with them? We don't give up, folks. We don't give up because it's hard. We often give up because we get discouraged. It is up to us as leaders to speak life into our people and to encourage them to believe in what we do and what we look at each and every day. So that brings me to really, this is one of my favorites, the favorite areas to talk about, and that's where we create relationships. And I'm not going to deny some people are better at this than others. Some people have to work harder at it than others, but it's such an important component to us as leaders in any organization. So there's 4 different areas that I think really succumbs to what this relationship building looks like. But first and foremost, know that no one creates success alone. We're not out on a one-man island. We have people surrounding us. I think one of the most important things you can do as a leader in any organization is make sure you have someone that you trust that holds you accountable. I had an accountability person, partner, friend that did not work in my building, but we had breakfast once a week and we would talk about things in our workplace. We actually at one time taught together as teachers. And when I went on and became a school leader, I never, ever want to forget what it's like to be in a classroom and be in that role, especially as a school administrator. That was really important to me to know the role of everyone in my building and to really have that connection. That person held me accountable to not forget what that was like. All right. And I think we have to surround ourselves by people that we trust, that hold us accountable to our words, our actions, and the work that we do each day. So when we look at building those relationships, one of the very first ones that I think of, and I think is one of the most important ones, is communication and how we communicate. Most relationships and teams break down because of poor communication, right? So when we look at this, this is one of my favorite quotes. I forget where I heard it, but it really rings true in my mind and in my heart. And I really encourage you to look closely and listen closely to that. Communication builds trust. Trust generates commitment. Commitment fosters teamwork, and teamwork delivers great results. We cannot do anything in any field without communicating and communicating clearly. With that being said, I thought I was an excellent communicator as a school principal. I did weekly newsletters. Multiple emails. And I'm not saying when you communicate, everything's by emails. I would go in and talk with individuals. And every year, one of the things that I would do is I would have my staff come in and meet with me one-on-one. And one of the questions I would ask is, what can I do better? And as a leader, that's very vulnerable. And it was always one of the hardest days for me because you have to allow that constructive criticism to come in. And choose what you're going to listen to and what you're going to take to heart. But that one question I would ask is, what is it that I could do better? And I always thought I was an excellent communicator. And 9 times out of 10, the majority of individuals would say to me, you could communicate better. That was an eye-opener for me. What was I missing in that communication piece? And so it really makes you think. You may think you're an excellent communicator, but ask your team. Ask those that you work for, what area can you improve on? And see what comes up. That was a real big eye opener for me. Another area is connect. Well, how do you connect? We communicate to connect. That is the whole purpose of why we communicate. We want to connect with individuals. It's where we build our bond. And you're never going to have commitment without connection. People are not going to commit to you as a leader. They're not going to commit to your organization, right? Unless you have a connection with them. And most likely it needs to be a positive connection. One of the ways I connected with my staff during one staff meeting, I think it was at the beginning of the year, and I don't know if you've ever heard of this, there's a great team building activity called Hero, Hardship, and Highlight. It works best when you're like in a small group of 8 or 10 people. Obviously, in one of my buildings, we had 150 staff members. We did not do this in a full staff. We broke this into smaller groups. And in that close circle, we were standing, and you would ask and go around the circle for each individual to share a hero, a hardship, and a highlight in their life. Could be in their professional life, could be in their personal life. It's what they felt comfortable sharing. I went into this thinking we're going to build connection, right? And we did. Oh, trust me, we did. But there were also a lot of tears in that process that I did not see coming. And it almost depends on the how much trust there is within the group of people that you're doing this with, right? But it gets people to connect and it gets people to trust, because trust in any organization is paramount for our success. So out of that also comes commitment. Leaders you lead the way, you go first. If you want a committed team, you have to just demonstrate your commitment to them. One year, one of our themes was we over me. It's not about the individual and one person doing it. We actually had t-shirts made that had we and a line underneath of we, and then me at the bottom. It's thinking of others before yourself. It's that servant leadership. I don't know if you've ever seen Ken Blanchard's work on servant leadership. I highly recommend it. How do we serve those that work with us or work for us? What does that service piece look like? There's another book, you can tell I love sharing books, called The Hard Hat, about a lacrosse team. And there was one member of their lacrosse team. He wasn't the best player, but my goodness, he worked harder than anyone else to get to where he was. And he embodied everything there was of being a team player. And the epitome of that team player, they would get a hard hat, and they were awarded that through the year. And they, that team leader, that team captain who built that camaraderie among their team was honored to have that hard hat. That individual was actually took a puck to the chest in one of the games and died instantly. And it's from he played for Cornell. My point behind this is he followed, and he was a legacy in and of itself, not because of how he played the game, but how he brought his team together, and is now honored in ways that was never even imagined. I had a team one year, one of my grade level teams, who always got along, who always made things work, worked really well for students, for parents. And then there were some changes that happened. And one of the individuals in that team came to me and said, I just don't like how my team is working right now. We're on edge with each other. There's a lot of angst among us and disagreements. I really don't like what we're doing. I would like for us as a team to read this book called The Hard Hat. And she wanted my permission. Number one, you don't need my permission. If you feel that is a piece that's going to bring your team together, my attitude is go for it. That book, in working with that team and them doing that book study, had such an impact on that team because they were all, number one, committed to each other, right? They didn't like how things were going. They didn't agree with everything, but there was already that connection and that commitment. And they were vulnerable with each other. That team ended up being one of the best grade level teams I've ever had. And they went on to really, really make a difference in students' lives. So because of that, I had another team, I think of two years later, who was seeing some of that same angst. And I went to them and I said, hey, we need to read The Hard Hat, right? We need to do this. And they reluctantly said, okay. Do you think the results with that team were the same? They weren't, because there wasn't that commitment. It came from me. It wasn't the we over me. That one was coming from me. It had to come from them. And so I think when we talk about creating success in our organization, we have to make sure that we have that we over me mentality. And then ultimately is that care element. And what does that care look like? Finding that caring trademark. How do you uniquely demonstrate that you care for others? All right. I am a words of affirmation person. I don't know if you've ever heard of the book, The 5 Love Languages. Has to do with marriage, but it gives you these 5 different love languages. There's actually a book out there by Gary Chapman called The 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace. It helps you understand what each person on your team, what is their love language? What feeds them, right? What lifts them up? My staff always knew that if I wanted to feed into them, they got a cake pop. I love to bake. And that is how I fed, literally, but that is what I fed into my team. That was my trademark, my caring trademark. But the other thing that I did with this book of the 5 love languages or 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace is it really guided me towards what my individual team members needed. Where one person just would want me to give them words of affirmation, another individual is going to want to have me give them quality time. Hey, let me go give them a 5-minute break so they can just take an extra break. Knowing and caring for your team is what is going to create that last long commitment. All right. Any questions at this point? Any comments? Anything anyone wants to share? Whoops. Went that way too fast. Just checking out the chat here real quick. Make sure I'm not missing anything. Oh, someone asked me what the 3 H's are again. Hero, hardship, and highlight. Who's a hero in your life? What is a hardship you've endured? And what is a highlight that you have in your life? Something that you always look forward to or that is something you're really proud of. Those are the 3 H's. Okay. All right. So finally, to wrap up with looking at positive leaders lead with purpose. What is your purpose? Numbers and goals don't drive people. All right. People with purpose, they are what drive the numbers and achieve the goals. I often like to say that, in the building I was put into mid-year, it was a very toxic environment. I'll be honest with you, very toxic. I was put there in mid-October because of a big scandal that happened in the building. Teachers were broken, staff was broken, very, very filled with toxicity. What am I going to do as a leader walking into that building? I'll be very honest with you. We didn't focus on test scores that year. We didn't focus necessarily on student achievement, even though that is our role. That was not our focus. That year, we sat down and we sang Kumbaya most of the year. And I don't mean that joke. I do mean it jokingly. Well, what does that mean? I fed the staff on what they needed in order to heal, right? We needed to rebuild the culture. We need to rebuild what we stood for. And that had to start from ground one. And I did. I got some flack from that. Well, what about student achievement? What about test scores? What about what we're doing with students? Well, yes, instruction was important in what we were doing, and those numbers were important, but it didn't drive us that year. Once we rebuilt that culture and established what we were all about, guess what happened? We went from the least performing school to the highest performing school within a year and a half. That wasn't me. That was our staff. That was coming together and looking at those 4 C's of that commitment, that communication, that caring, and that trust that was building. So as I say that, John Gordon once said, and boy, do I agree with this, we don't get burned out because of what we do. We get burned out because we forget why we do it. I can tell you the number of times that I would come home frustrated after a day at work and sitting down with my husband and having these conversations and just pleading him, why am I doing this? The minute I said that why, he's one of my other accountability people, by the way. He held me accountable to why did I go into administration? Why did I choose to do this role? Why do I want to be a leader? It comes back to that legacy piece. It comes back to what you want to instill in other people and your purpose and your role in doing that. We would do something in our building called One Word, where mid-year, which was really a hard time of year, mid-year, some kind of boost needed to happen among our staff. And I asked them to come up with one word every January. What is the word that you are going to create and come up with for yourself that's going to push through the rest of the year and encourage you through the rest of the year? I remember the year, I think it was during COVID. Mine was joy. My one word was joy. Find joy in everything I'm doing, because I'm sure just like you and as leaders during those COVID years, it didn't matter. You couldn't win. Okay, there's still moments you just can't win as a leader, but find joy in that. What am I going to learn from this, right? What purposeful actions are going to help build my legacy? And what do I want to bring in that whole realm? And so that brings me to really one of the last things I want to share with you. This is, what is your why? That's your reflection question. There's a video here, I think it's about 5 minutes long, that I want to end with. It's off of YouTube, so you can all find it. It's not a big deal. I share it with anyone I can possibly share it with. It was shared to me from an area superintendent in the state. And it's about knowing your why. So I am going to go ahead and let me get out of here and share it really quick.
How do I know? A lot of people, when they think of the phrase, how do I know, they always want to put the what behind it. How do I know what I'm supposed to do? The question that you really should ask is, how do I know why I'm here. Because when you know your why, your what becomes more clear and more impactful. If you know, like for instance, people know comedy, but that's what I do. My why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. So I can do comedy, I can write books, I can be in a movie because all of it is motivated by my why. In fact, I have a new web series out called Michael Jr. Break Time. We probably just did the 6th episode. It's on YouTube. So every single Wednesday at 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode on YouTube of Michael Jr. Break Time. What it is it's me. I travel around the country and I do stand-up comedy, in case you didn't know. And in the middle of my comedy set sometime, I'll stop and just talk to my audience. And we've been filming this, and it's pretty cool. So we're in Winston-Salem. I'm gonna show you a clip from Winston-Salem. And I'm just talking to this guy in the audience, and he tells me that he's a musical instructor at a school. So I was like, all right, you're a musical instructor. Can you sing? Let me hear you sing a song. So this is what happened at the last episode of Michael Jr.'s Break Time. Check it. So you're a musical director? Yes, sir. All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Wow, that bro could sing. You know what I'm saying? All right, now, what you give me the version is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick if you know which version I'm talking about. Just see if that exists. Let me see what you got. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved me. Okay. Here's what I want you to catch. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what becomes more impactful because you're walking towards or in your purpose.
So,
In Omdurman, Sudan, thousands of families are suffering due to conflict and displacement. With no
there we go. Sorry. So, obviously, you see the reason why I wanted to share that video. Very, very impactful. We all know our what. We know what we're supposed to do day in and day out. But sometimes we forget our why. And so part of this, and really trying to talk about this positivity piece, is to help you recognize that your why has a lot of value and to remember what that why is. This last slide right here just shows several of the books that I had mentioned, well, some of them. You see the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace. I did talk about the hard hat. In addition to the power of positive leadership, there is the power of positive team. I did include the ideal team player as well as culturize. I'm such a proponent of building cultures in any workforce. Culturize is phenomenal. I will tell you, it is written on the concept of a school system. He is an educator, but there are so many things in that text that is very applicable to any kind of work organization. I did see don't want to forget anyone who was in the chat. A great comment was made. How do you connect with an employee where you have tried all four options: communicate, connect, commitment, and care? Um, I never truly said that this was going to really work. Just going to stop sharing for a minute with absolutely everything, right? And everyone. There are going to be some people in our organizations that may not be attuned to this. And I also like to say that, there's one or two things that's going to happen with those individuals. One, either you continue that positivity in the workforce and you try to build that communication and that commitment from them, and you try to get everybody else on board, and eventually they're either going to come on board or they're going to get sick of it and say, I want nothing to do with this, and they're going to walk away from it. And if that's the situation they choose to do, to walk away from it, then I'm not quite sure it's someone you really want on your team anyhow, if they're not going to commit to that. But again, it's how we act. It's not just what we say, it's what we do as leaders. So if anything else, I hope our time together today has been influential in the sense of maybe you recommitting to what your why is and why we do the things that we do each and every day and how we lead those that are in our organizations. Any questions, comments, anything else anyone wants to share before I send it back over to Jay?
I have a quick question. I know you mentioned kind of like the process for going through this. Is there any like activities that you would recommend or any like resources to kind of like help guide that process if you're doing it for, let's say, the first time?
Do you mean like the process of getting your team committed to each other and that commitment, that care? There's a variety of different like team building opportunities you can do. The 3 H's was just one that I had shared. I highly recommend, maybe I'm a book nerd, I don't know what it is, but again, a lot of those books that I read is what drove me to my philosophy in leadership. Um, I think in general, it's having that open communication with staff. I mean, there's a variety of different things that you can do with them. But I think one of the things you have to do, especially in knowing what your staff is like, is you have to learn also how to have fun together, right? And have those kind of opportunities. One of the things I did one year during that toxic year where we were singing Kumbaya is for our December staff meeting, we had a minute to win it. We learned how to have fun with each other, but also being very clear on what the expectations were within the workforce. And it's a fine balance. And I think what you have to figure out is what's going to work for you and the team that you're leading. What worked in that building for me was not necessarily going to work in the other building that I was in, but it's getting to know your team.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, Jay, I will send it right back to you then.
All right. Hey, thank you very much, Tiffany. You never disappoint. We appreciate. I have pages of notes here I just took in the last hour. I love the juxtaposition between faith and fear and that definition. So thank you for all that you shared with us. On behalf of all the other book nerds that you talked about, thanks for my TBR list. Just got a lot deeper. I think everybody's did, but we wanted to thank you, and we wanted to thank everyone that has joined us for this call. Just a reminder, we will be sharing our contact information and the recording of today's webinar with each of you via email. Please feel free to reach out and ask questions or let us know how we can support you in your training moving forward. We also have Leadership Base Camp coming up at the end of the month. If you have any questions about that or would like to join us for that, you can respond to the email that comes out, and we're happy to reach back out to you. So thank you again for joining us. We love partnering with you. Thank you again to Tiffany. We hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Is it just us? You're on mute.
That's right. No, I had to move everyone to the waiting room. But now, yes, it's just the two of us. Great job, Tiffany. I loved it.
Thank you. Thank you. Is it what we were looking for pretty much generally?
Absolutely, yeah. So, like I said, the webinars are a space for instructors to kind of do their own thing. It helps us learn new topics that you may be passionate or an expert on. So, if you have any others, definitely let me know. I think for the rest of this year, I have July, August, September, and then November and December open. So I can send those dates. And I know I set dates for them, but sometimes it's the second, sometimes the third Wednesday of the month, so we could always change it a week before, a week after. But yeah, if you have any others you'd like to present, definitely let me know. And while we're here, we're hopefully wrapping up some things with Prince William. This is also the transportation group, but from what I understand, different levels, because apparently it's a big department.
It is.
So, yeah, from what I understand, like lots of different levels of supervisors.
Different layers. Yep. Because the main group I was with, they were bus route supervisors, which is totally different. Yeah, there's a lot of layers there.
I bet. Yeah. So we have that group and the maintenance group who we haven't worked with yet. So I really hope we're able to finalize those dates sometime in the spring. But as soon as I have them, I'll reach out. And we have quite a few from different clients and we just need to lock down the dates. So I'll definitely keep you posted.
Thanks so much, Diane. I appreciate it.
Thank you as well, Tiffany. Again, great job.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. See ya. Take care. Bye.